The main question that we're solving today is, what do I do to figure out which motor I need for my mechanism? In specifics, to you, team 20190, why are my motors stalling? This calculator should have the answer as to why the motors that you're using are not the right motors, or how to figure out what the right motors are. This essentially is a very fundamental tool to a first robotics student or designer for figuring out what motor I should be using for my mechanism. It's called the JVN Design Calc. I will have it linked in the resources area as well as in this video description. So don't you worry. I would recommend you see this spreadsheet, save it to your drive, and use it whenever you're trying to figure out what motor you should be using for your mechanism. To start off with, let's quickly go over some of the tabs. So we have our custom 2-speed drive tab. That is for drivetrains that have shifters. Don't worry about that. That's an FRC thing. And even then, don't worry about that. We're not really using shifters. Unless we are, but chances are we're not. We have our custom 1-speed drivetrain. This is the important one. This is the one that you'll be using to figure out how fast your robot needs to go and the types of motors you're using on your drivetrain. Don't really worry about the articulating drivetrain. I've never touched this in my life. But I mean, it's here. We have our rotary mechanism. So this is for our arms or any mechanism that is attached onto a gear or pulley that rotates. We have our linear mechanism. So this is for our linear slides, our Viper slides, and any other sliding mechanism that's, you know, rigged through a cascading lift or a continuous chain lift. And then last, we have our intake mechanism. So this will just give us some really interesting information about our intake mechanisms. So I'm going to go to the 1-speed drive, so I don't have to worry about editing this video much. I'm just going to get straight to the action here. Every cell that is not red are cells that just output the data. These are actual calculations. Don't change those. The things that we do want to change are these cells in red. So I'll go over the ones that I touch usually. I don't touch the speed loss constant. I think that's there's probably documentation somewhere indicating what this is. I'm not sure what it is. I don't really care for it. I do touch the drivetrain efficiency because nothing runs at 100%. So if you kind of wanted to run your drivetrains, if you wanted to run your motors at like 80% or 70% or 60% or 50%, then you could touch that drivetrain efficiency. But 90 is pretty fair. We have gearboxes in the drivetrain. This essentially is the amount of really the amount of wheels that you're seeing in your drivetrain in an FTC case. But in an FRC case, it can be different. And even in FTC, it can be different because most of our drives are holonomic. We have 4 gearboxes per drivetrain because we have 4 wheels, and these wheels are at angles, or maybe they're not, maybe they're mechanism, but they're very much directly driven by the motor. So we have 4 gearboxes, and then we have the number of motors per gearbox. Number of motors per gearbox determines how many motors are in each of our gearboxes. And so again, in our FTC situation, we have 1 motor per gearbox and 4 motors on the drivetrain. If you had a QE drive, you would have 3 gearboxes in the drivetrain with 1 motor per gearbox. And a mechanism drive, again, it's still 4 motors or 4 gearboxes in the drivetrain with 1 motor per gearbox. We also have total weight, so this would be the weight of our robot, as well as the weight on the driven wheels, which I set to 100% because it's a drivetrain, and unless you're doing something different, which you're probably not. It's 100% of the weight of the robot is acting on our wheels. We have the wheel diameter, which is the diameter in inches of the wheels that we're using. Google's a lovely tool, unless you know those numbers off by heart, or to convert from inches to millimeters and whenever, but go build up parts are in millimeters, so you're gonna have to convert it to inches. And we have the wheel coefficient of friction, I'm pretty sure, or the rolling resistance. So I keep that at 1. I'm not sure what this value is. It could be different, and if you figured it out, then please use it. But otherwise, I keep it at 1 because it's all theory at the end of the day. So we also have our drop downs with all the motors, and so I'll go over what is currently happening with team 20190. So I'm gonna change that, and I'll talk about this section later. What this calculator does is you input a bunch of parameters and it tells you the outputs, or it provides you the outputs in these orange boxes with those white cells. So we have the drivetrain free speed after calculations, the adjusted speed based on your efficiency, and the speed loss constants, and so on and so forth, as well as your pushing current draw per motor. The main goal of this calculator is to figure out which motor decreases this current draw number while increasing our speed in some cases. Maybe we don't care for speed, but again, if it's a drivetrain, we want it to be fast, or mainly fast. We want it to be really, really fast, or torquey, but usually fast is what we're aiming for. Maybe not too fast, but again, we could change that with code. We want it to be fast enough and strong enough to not burn our motors out. So let's talk about the case of team 20190. They have a holonomic drive. It's an X drive. We have our 4 wheels set up 45 degrees, and we have these tiny little wheels, which is fine. It gives us acceleration. The issue that we've encountered is that our motors are burning out. And why are our motors burning out? Well, we have go build a matrix motors, just straight direct connected to our drivetrain, and I know they are those matrix motors because with GoBuilda we have yellow jackets, and the yellow jackets have yellow jackets, but they also include these black parts right here, which are our gearboxes. They give us that highlighted ratio of whatever. In this case, it's a 19.2 to 1 ratio, where 19.2 is the ratio of the output shaft to the input shaft, or the input motor. I know that we're using just matrix motors because I could see these 5000 series matrix motors mounted on the robot. A lot of the data for these motors are available down here, but they're also available from Game Manual 0, another link I'll link in the resources description, wherever. And we can see the actual motor efficiency curves, as well as just these output numbers, which is what lines up with what we see up here. We see that has a free speed of 5,900 rotations per minute, which is really, really fast. Really, really fast moving things tend to have a very small stall torque value. And this one has a stall torque value of 0.19 newtons per meter, which is not a lot. We also know that really fast things will have a pretty decent stall current. Well, again, like smaller stall torque, the stall current will also be pretty high, but it's very easy to stall, so you're gonna draw a whole lot of amperage. But we also see that the free current, so when current's kind of just running through the motor, is 0.3, which is really, really small. So you can see that we start moving, and we'll see this number right here just whenever we're moving with just the wheels, or when we're just pushing the robot in and of itself. And I'll drop this down to something a little realistic, 10 pounds, right? I think that's how much just that drivetrain weighed. When the robot is just moving, each motor is drawing 2.35 amps. Each motor is essentially stalling because we're drawing so many amps, way too many amps. Then they kind of just stop working, and they just get really, really hot. Our motors get really, really hot because they're working super duper hard in order to move. But again, very tiny torque, not a lot of torque, so we can't really move as much. I mean, there is a case where you could use these motors, but I don't know. I feel like you'd have to have like 4 motors in the gearbox. And hey, look at that. We dropped it. We dropped our pushing current draw from 25 to 6.56, but that requires 4 motors. And yeah, we'd be moving really fast, but we don't need to be moving that fast. No one ever needs to be moving this fast. We also don't have the space for it because we're trying to be efficient with our robot design. And that would be 16 motors on the drivetrain, which is pretty well over legal limit. We also got to be realistic because we don't want to figure out the math for the current weight, but we'll do that. Let's go with the temporary fix, and then we'll go with what you should be doing. So the temporary fix in this case is let's put on some Never S20s. Never S20s, these are those Andy Mark motors. Essentially have a gear ratio of 20-1. So the driven gear, the output shaft is 20, and the motor itself moves at 1. So every one rotation of the motor, the output shaft moves 20 times. If we were to slap on Never S20 motors, we would see that currently with our current solution, yeah, we're moving at 3.9 feet per second, which is again still pretty quick. We're also seeing that our current draw, so our pushing current draw, is 3.95 amps, which is well under our stall current. So I wouldn't say we're never gonna stall, but we're not really stalling when we're trying to push something. Stall torque is 1.39, so we're not going to be pushing many things, but we're not going to stall, which is great. It'll kind of just spin our wheels while we're trying to move forward. This is, again, temporary solution because we need to use a little more foresight. We need to be thinking ahead with our designs always. We want to be thinking of what the final solution of our robot will look like. I can assure you, unless you're lightening your robot, which you probably aren't at this point in time because we're trying to build something, our weight will not be 10 pounds. I think with the arm, maybe some climbers and just other fancy features to enable your future, we want to assume that our weight's, it's probably going to be double what it currently is. It's not going to just be the drivetrain. It's going to be the arm, and it'll probably be less than 20 pounds. But even then, we want to be on the safe side. So when we increase the amount of weight, we could see that the pushing current increases as well to 7.5 amps, which is still under the stall current. So that would mean that getting some Never S20s on our drivetrain should solve our problems. But since we're using Go Build a parts, we may as well be using our matrix motors and changing out the gearboxes. So this is just a bare metal motor, but we could buy gearboxes over here on the Go Build a site, and we'll need to get 4 of them. So what we can do is we can essentially plug in the ratio of the gearbox that we're looking for into our calculator and see what those numbers are. Well, again, trying to minimize the stall current value or making sure that it's under stall current, while also maximizing speed. So let's try 2 numbers. We'll try 2 numbers. We'll try this 19.2-1 because it's closer to those Never S20s. And then we'll also try that 13.7 to see if we could, really get that speed. But I would probably stay on the side of the 19.2-1s. So what I'd want to do here is using that bare metal Go Build a Matrix motor, I'm going to add that 19.2 to this section of the calculator, which is essentially determining or telling us the gear ratio and even the compound gear ratio of the gearbox that we're adding onto it. But again, our gearboxes are planetary, and there are some cases where we can configure our gearboxes with the case of like the Vex planetary motor system. And even here, we could add some gears or pulleys to further increase our gear ratio. But again, for now, keeping it simple, I'm just going to add that 19.2, and we see that our pushing current draw per motor is 2.91, really small, still under that stall current, and we move relatively quickly with 3.8 feet per second. If I wanted to go even further, we could try that 13.7 to 1, and we'll see what that works out to be. We can see that our pushing current jumped up a bit, but our speed also increased. So 13.7 is a good gearbox that we could use. But what about 3.7 to 1? How would that look? You can see that with the 3.7 to 1, we're moving really fast. We're moving at about 20 feet per second, which is quick. But our current drop per motor is over our stall current. So that would mean we will be stalling our motors. Even at that 90% efficiency, our motors will be stalling. So there is very much a trade-off with speed and torque. And let's show the other side, because sometimes you're like, I never want to stall. I just want to be really, really torquey. I just want to make sure that, you know, we're going to be pushing around everything. I'll try something outrageous like this 99.5 to 1. So you can see that our current draw is 0.80 amps, which is, again, stupidly under our stall current, but we move at a speed of we barely move a foot per second. We move at a speed of, like, again, that adjusted speed over the free speed. Like, the free speed shows it's 0.73 feet per second, but if we're moving at that 90% efficiency with the speed lock constant of 81%, it actually works out to be like 1/6 of a foot per second, which is crazy small. That's like, what? That's 2 inches. 2 inches a second or something. We don't need to be that torquey is really what it is. Our stall torque would actually increase, but again, we're not moving anywhere. There's trade-offs to everything and a perfect balance that needs to happen between speed and torque. Makes sense to just go with I would probably recommend the 19.2s. If we don't have those, then find some, or if we don't have the funding to get 19.2 planetary gearboxes, then find some Never Rest 20s and slap those on your chassis. Though you'll have to probably print or buy some adapters to mount those Andy Mark motors. So I would highly recommend all teams use these calculators for figuring out your designs, figuring out how fast they move, play around with not only this custom one-speed drivetrain section, but the rotary mechanism for your arms, and even the linear mechanisms for not only your linear slides, but also your linear sliding arms, as well as the intake mechanism, and even just, if you really wanted to, you could look at the custom 2-speed drive stuff. But again, you don't have shifter. We don't really use shifters. It's a FRC thing. So that's all I have for you on the topic of the design calculator. I highly recommend you use it in your designs so you don't end up stalling your motors, because a stalled motor is